Chapter 24, we are talking about the ideologies of change in Europe. Keep in mind I'm looking down at my notes, just in case you're wondering what I'm looking at. Just wanted to hit a couple of high points for you as you're going through this particular chapter. Make sure that you notice we start off with the Quadruple Alliance meeting at the Congress of Vienna. Involved in that are Russia, Prussia, Austria, and Great Britain. Now, one of the things I'll point out to you as we move into this particular section of time is there's a lot of alliances going on, some of them secret, some of them public. But the idea here is that I've got your back if you've got my back. And this progresses even to modern day as far as when nations attack each other, there is often an alliance that's going to resonate with that particular attack. So this group meets. France is later allowed to join the discussion. They're focusing on the discouragement of aggression, and that is due to Napoleon, his unbelievable reign of terror as he runs through Europe, pushing every line and every boundary, some of the most radicalized movements since Alexander the Great. Europe wants to make sure we don't have another Napoleon, and so this is what that meeting is about. They wanted to make sure that peace is upheld. You also want to make sure and notice one of the strongest members of this particular group is the Foreign Minister of Austria, von Metternich. And Metternich is important because he is going to lead the movement against subversive liberal ideas. And what do I mean by that? Well, this is a group of nations that are running on what we would consider to be old ideas. That you have a king and queen that are hereditary and have been there for generation upon generation. And Metternich wants to see this idea continue to flourish and grow. It's a blind allegiance. You do whatever your king or queen says. This is where you see the rise of a conversation piece called dual revolution. Dual revolution, the liberal changes in economics and politics, they're tied together, and that's what this dual revolution is. We see liberalism is feared in Europe, particularly amongst people like Metternich and others. This idea that change is coming is very fearful to men like Metternich. And what are they going to do? What's the plan? Well, it's going to involve probably some very hard times and possibly even bloodshed, which is ironic since I'm just talking about the Congress of Vienna and the effort to stop bloodshed. But that's for a widespread thing. If you want to keep it within your nation, then it's all good. Okay, I'm sort of joking, sort of not. All right, so as we move on, we see terminology that you want to know for your test: liberalism and laissez-faire. Liberalism is some economic principles that are focusing on what's next. We want to move forward beyond what we've already got. It's not working, it's not productive for every portion of society, so what's next? Adam Smith's economic doctrine of laissez-faire called for unrestricted business and no government interference. This is a radical idea as government, i.e. the king or queen, runs all means of society up until this point. So this is a pretty big deal. With this, you're going to see the rise of some cries for democracy. So nationalism, what's nationalism? It's another term for your test. Nationalism is the idea that you are, let's see if I can simplify this, and when we talk about the Olympics, it's USA, USA. This pride, this overwhelming sense of belonging to a nation or group of people, that's nationalism. And you'll see a number of different politicians during this time period and today that capitalize on that. You see the American flag lapel pin. We see people all the time try and capitalize on that. Now, that sounds a bit pessimistic on my end, my apologies, but it's all for the analogy from your book. So this idea of nationalism, we're seeing the idea that if you belong to a particular nation, then you should be pro whatever nation we're referring to. Within that nation, though, especially in Europe, we see a number of different ethnic bodies who really do struggle with, but I want to keep my ethnicity, I want to keep my ethnic roots. What does that look like? How do we do that? So we see some interesting dynamics happening here. Cultural unity is established through a national language. It's taught through mass education, which is a novel concept for these people. You have symbolic language such as flags, as well as emblems and parades. This idea of building pride in your country. It's so much more than just borders and language. We see that it's pushing this idea of your nation is superior to another. All right, so with this, we see also this pushback on something called socialism. Now, socialists believe in a strong system of central government controls, and government is expected to organize the economy and assist the poor. Who else is going to do it? Well, as Americans, we look at that as something that religion, organized churches should do, but that's not widely held during this particular time period. We see people like Charles Fourier, who has this dream of a socialist utopia where we all live and we all share and we all work. And we also see an emancipation of women, but also in this we see sexual freedom. Well, what does that mean? Well, you need to read the book for that. Karl Marx, he is co-author of the Communist Manifesto, arguing that middle-class interests were opposed to the interests of the industrial working class. And he said that one class was the way to support the economy in your particular nation. You also see that he talks about a society split into the bourgeoisie, which you need to know that terminology for your test. It's also the middle class, or the proletariat, which is the modern working class. And he believed that a revolution was coming, and he believed that the revolution was probably going to be violent, and it was important that it be that way. Next up in your text, it talks about the reforms that go on in Great Britain and then in France, and we see a number of different aspects of that. Some of this is going to be based on reforms needed in factories, as there are just people that are exploited and not taken care of, and so Great Britain begins to deal with that through their laws. We see the Reform Bill of 1832 that is going to be important to try and protect the rights of the people. We also see the 10 Hours Act, which is going to limit the workday for women and children. And like I said in the last chapter, some of these reforms are not well received amongst the people because they need the money. And well, yeah, it's probably not good for my kid to be working at age 8 for 12 hours a day, but we need the money. So these aren't always very well received. And in France, we see the Constitutional Charter of 1814, permitting freedom for intellectuals and artists, but still you only have a few men that are able to vote, so what are they going to do? You see Louis Philippe, who is basically run out of office, and you see the rise of Louis Napoleon, who really does capitalize on the name Napoleon, and he becomes the new president. He basically took power over the assembly and then ended up proclaiming himself emperor, which there are issues with that. Read your book. We also see a number of different revolutions beginning in 1848. This runs all throughout Europe. You see one in Hungary, you see one in Prussia, as well as the German Confederation. In the German Confederation, a lot of their problem is something to do with modernization. Page 725, it talks a little bit about that. You see Austria and Russia dealing with the reestablishment of the German Confederation. What does it look like for all of us to be working on the same page? And they have some struggles with that. During this time period, in these revolutions, one of the really big revolutions is one in Sardinia. This is a relatively moderate Italian state, a perfect breeding ground for the nationalist movement. You have Cavour that steps in, who basically wants to consolidate Sardinia and kind of works into who am I going to best align myself with? Am I going to align myself with Austria, or should I align myself with the French, or maybe better yet, we could just move all the way into Italy. So between Cavour and Garibaldi, we see him step in. He is working towards a unified Italian state, and so make sure to read that particular information. Another heavy hitter, I mentioned Metternich in your last chapter, is Otto von Bismarck. Power-loving but flexible, pragmatic Prussian leader who is going to build his office of chief minister into something really quite remarkable for this time period. He ends up collecting taxes, building the military, and ruling without parliamentary consent, and yet They love him. A lot of what his work is very important. He removed Austria from German political affairs, made them more nationalistic. We love Austria, so Austria, power to Austria, that kind of move. He even maneuvered the German parliament into accepting his spending and put Germany on the road to unification. He is just such a power player in this particular time period. He even led a military endeavor into France. This is going to threaten peace as far as the whole concern from the Congress of Vienna. His swift victory in the Franco-Prussian War provided Germany with new territories and triggered an upsurge in German nationalism. We're so great, we can beat the French. Forget about it, we're fantastic. During this time period, we also see Russia finally starting to catch up. They had not participated in the Industrial Revolution until this point. There begins to be this push that we're missing out on something pretty remarkable, and so we need to make some changes. This is going to come from the working class. They are tired of being mistreated and used, and so we see some concerns. Tsar Alexander II began this process of modernization. He emancipated the serfs who ended up receiving the land that they had been working. He reformed the legal system and liberalized education, but all of this came to an end when he was assassinated. And his heir did not appreciate the moves that he had made and basically went back on everything that he had done. There's a number of things that go on in Russian history. You need to know about the October Manifesto, which granted full civil rights and promised a parliament known as the Duma with real legislative power. During this time period, we also see some changes in the population and how they are dealing with some pretty basic problems. They're basic to us, but to them sometimes they're overwhelming. Sometimes it's hard for me to wrap my mind around if I've got a cold, or like right now I'm dealing with allergies. It's really hard for me to imagine a day and age where you can't go to Walgreens and pick up some Claritin or something like that. A cold was devastating. Some of these issues that to us we hate for a few days, this could have lasting consequences even to the point of death. And so we see some of these things come into play in the life of the emerging urban society. Couple of notes I wanted to share with you. You have Erwin Chadwick, who pushed for the cleaning up of the urban environment. At this point, they don't really understand the importance of cleanliness and how it's going to impact the health of other people. And so we see this begin to take shape with Erwin Chadwick. He called for a sewer system to carry away human waste, and this is going to be the basis of Britain's first public health law. You also see chemist Louis Pasteur, who is going to develop the germ theory, who said basically that disease is caused by living organisms and can be controlled. At this point, they don't understand that at all. They don't understand where sickness comes from and the importance of stopping it. And so we see a major shift here with the germ theory. We also see the improvement of mass transportation, which is going to greatly influence where people are living. Before now, people are living right up against the factory, which means they're living in horrendous environments. If they can now live further out from the factory, they have more options. They don't have to live on top of each other, almost literally, and they can move back and forth quite easily. So mass transportation is super important, allowing individuals to live further away from work. We also see a change in the social hierarchies. We see a more defined upper middle class. You have these business families who are doing well for themselves. They're drawn into a lifestyle of the aristocrat, and that's somewhat important as well. And then you also have that lower middle class. It's usually the shopkeepers, the traders, as well as some small manufacturers. We see some changes in the way people live. We see drinking alcohol as it's a lifetime choice for many of these people. This goes beyond just this particular time period, but they're now involving themselves in other things. They can go to the theater, they can gamble, they can watch sports. Sports were not even really a thing until this point, as far as just these basic little pockets of historical events that we know, okay, they played something that's akin to basketball or soccer. We now can see that they are they're going to cockfights and they are watching this and gambling on it. They are going to races and watching soccer and other spectator sports. We also see the use of music for relaxation. as well as the rise of something called vaudeville. We also see the changes in family. Women and men, that divide becomes more and more pronounced during this time period. The men are the wage earners, and the women are the keepers of the domestic sphere. This is where that separate spheres comes in from the last chapter. We see a number of women being discriminated against due to their sex. They're not allowed to get jobs. They can't move into higher education, etc. Marriage is also now finally starting to look a little bit more emotional. It's about love. It's about finding some emotional and sexual attraction with families, particularly the husband and the wife are really developing a relationship. It's not just an arranged marriage where this makes sense for us financially to marry you off into this family. Children are often left at home in search of greater independence. We do begin to see the limitation of the number of children parents would have. It's an intentional act that some of it might be due to earlier research that I've mentioned already, and then some of it might just be because, you know what, we can't afford more children in our own home, or we don't want more children in our home. And those are important things to take notice of. You also have Charles Darwin, who established his theory of evolution through his work on the origin of species by the means of natural selection. He couldn't figure out exactly how they evolved, but he was beginning to understand that they did evolve, and so he kind of explored that in his work. We also see kind of a step beyond that with something called social Darwinism. That is not his doing, by the way. Too often we attach him to social Darwinism, and I get it due to the name of it, but he didn't do that. It's taking that idea of survival of the fittest and applying it to humans. And what does that look like, and how does that impact the economy? How does that impact us socially, etc.? We also see some cultural shifts. Literature, you see The Hunchback of Notre Dame, you have the Grimm brothers writing those fairy tales, you have Les Miserables, you have a number of different incredible opportunities artistically that are going to really shape what people see in society. Your book also talks about trends in suffrage as far as women fighting for the right to vote, and this takes some time. Norway was the first to give women the right to vote, but most of the European nations, this didn't happen until World War I. With this, we see many gains in women's movements and women's issues as they are fighting for the right to vote. They're also going to be able to find other ways to express themselves and be taken care of. We also see the rise of the German Empire and the changes there. Another thing I just want to make a point of is the Dreyfus Affair. This is going to involve Alfred Dreyfus, who is a Jewish army captain in France, who is falsely accused of treason. It takes some time to finally get this man a fair trial. He is acquitted of these charges, but his reputation is ruined. This is the reason your book talks about this is because it's a very fair explanation of what's happening to the Jews in Europe during this time period, and it's happening a lot. I also want to make mention of Zionism. This is something from time to time I catch this word on the news and my ears perk up like, oh, I know what that is. Zionism is a concept that was originated through Theodore Herzl as far as made popular, is really what I should say. He is advocating for the Jewish homeland, that we should be carving out a section of land to protect the Jews, that they can go back home. And then, of course, you have German Union leaders who were revisionist, who were trying to update Marxist doctrines to reflect current political times. Do make sure to take time to read this particular chapter. I was just trying to gloss over some high points for you. Hopefully it'll help you as you prepare for your quiz. Have a great day.